Hi, my name is Bryn Griffiths. Welcome, Mish, to the 11th episode of the Labour Left podcast. And for the benefit of the viewers and listeners, my guest tonight is Mish Rahman. Mish, as many of you will know, is a Momentum supporter, a working-class socialist of Bangladeshi heritage, and he was elected to Labour's national executive back in 2020. Unfortunately, he lost his seat to the right wing of the Labour Party at this year's conference. He was also well and truly stitched up by the Labour right when he stood to be selected as Labour's parliamentary candidate in Wolverhampton West. More of that later. Before we get started, some of the feedback on the podcast has suggested that some people find the long form of the Labour Party Left podcast a little hard to digest in one go. So I'm splitting it today into two parts. In the first half, Mish and I are going to discuss Mish's political formation, how he came to be a socialist, and the fight within the Labour Party. And then after the break, prepare yourself for a discussion on Labour's torrid record on racism. So prepare yourself for the Ford report, Islamophobia, and Labour's terrible and disgraceful record on Gaza, which will shame our party for generations to come. So a meal of two parts tonight. How are you doing, Mish?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me, Bryn.
Great. So, Mish, let's jump straight in. What made you a socialist? I understand your dad was a big influence, and he campaigned against the National Front.
I don't think my dad was an influence in me becoming a socialist. What my dad was an influence in me was becoming a community-based community organizer, in becoming a anti-imperialist, in becoming a anti-racist, in becoming a anti-colonialist. So my dad organized with the Anti-Nazi League. Now, unfortunately, my dad isn't any longer with us, and he passed 20 years ago. And I've been politically really active in the last 12 years or so. So my political phase and my dad's political phase has never kind of joined up together. So I haven't really had many political conversations with my father, but I knew he was active with the Anti-Nazi League because I remember meetings and I remember banners and placards and rallies and demonstrations as a child. I myself became a socialist under Jeremy Corbyn. That's when I discovered socialism. As I said before that, I'd say I'm an anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist and anti-racist. I became a socialist under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. That's when I discovered socialism.
That's an interesting point to start the discussion about you, Mish, because on the 15th of June 2015, it was a big moment, wasn't it, when Jeremy secured his place on the ballot paper for the Labour leadership elections. And from that point up until the catastrophe in 2019, the left was in a really big position of influence in British politics. I'd be really interested to know, what were you say that Jeremy's seizing of the leadership was a big moment for you. What were you doing in that period between 2015 and 2019, Mish?
I live in the West Midlands. I'm born and brought up in the West Midlands. And during that period, I was very active locally and regionally. I was part of my local Momentum group, which was in Walsall, which was Walsall Momentum, where we had a solid bunch of socialists who were inspired by Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and active in the Labour Party. Locally, I was active in my CLP. I got on the executive as a BAME officer, and then I became campaign coordinator, and then I became chair of my CLP. This was between 2015 and 2019. So I was very active locally, and obviously in the 2017 election, when Momentum was at its peak in terms of being able to mobilize activists, I was going up and down the region, mainly trying to get Labour parliamentarians, Labour parliamentary candidates elected. And obviously we were also active in local elections, in our local council elections, and helping across the region getting Labour candidates elected in local capacity or in parliamentary positions.
So what were you doing? That's in the Labour Party, in the Labour Party machine. What were you doing outside the Labour Party? Did you have a community organisation background?
Yeah, so when I was 19, me and a bunch of other young Bangladeshi young people, we set up an organisation called the Bangladeshi Youth Organisation based in Walsall. It was a very successful project. This was in the in the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown era. It was a successful project in terms of we kept young people occupied off the streets into homework clubs. We set up leisure activities, and we set up mentoring programs, and it was really, really active. Obviously, there was a lot of funding back in those days before the coalition austerity government, and you were able to apply for projects and keep centres like that up and running. It was a real asset to the community. I got politicized during the Iraq War. That's when I got politicized. My political activism. I started to get politically educated. My father's activism was all community based. It was establishing his community, the Bangladeshi community, which in itself is a younger community compared to the Indian or the Pakistani community, because Bangladesh only itself was founded in 1971. So they was just finding their feet, and because of what was happening in Bangladesh, a lot of people were emigrating to the UK. His activism was establishing the community and establishing the family roots in terms of being able to provide for the family, not just here, but they had mouths to feed back home as well, because many families would have one or two earners responsible for 30, 40 people back then. So they didn't have the luxury to organise.
Tell me more about your opposition to the Iraq War, Mish.
My first political activity I remember was campaigning for the Labour Party in 1996 to get rid of the Tories, to get rid of John Major. From what I can remember, like I said, I wasn't very politically active, but I remember Tony Blair was kind of fresh, kind of better than the Tories. Labour did some good stuff, especially between 97 and 2001 with Sure Start, minimum wage being a particular memory. One thing that really annoyed me at the time, being a student, was Labour bringing in tuition fees. £1,000, if I remember, was what the tuition fee was that I had to pay. But then they also brought in EMA and stuff like that. So I remember people younger than me who were still at still doing A levels and stuff, actually had some money in their pocket, especially to go to college and stuff. So that was my first introduction to politics. What annoyed me, and obviously the world changed after 9/11, was the illegal invasion of Iraq and Tony Blair standing shoulder to shoulder with George Bush, who was, as we saw that back then, was a hawk. We could tell there's a personal sort of agenda for him to finish off what his dad couldn't finish off in the first Iraq War, and he was just egging for a fight. And obviously, we've seen subsequently the devastation the Iraq War has caused, not only to Iraqi children and innocent 500,000 or so that have died in Iraq since, but the actual instability and the rise of terrorism and all. I mean, the world is now a very different place, definitely a pivotal moment. And that's when I kind of ditched the Labour Party completely and said, no, it's not my sort of party, one that goes into war based on lies. I remember the 45-minute document by Alistair Campbell, I think, or the lies that we were told as well. I remember that because, like I said, I was at university at the time, and it's so obvious that Tony Blair was just blindfoldedly taking the UK to one. I remember Robin Cook and his really passionate speech in Parliament and his resignation. I completely ditched the Labour Party. And it was only in 2014 when I rejoined under Ed Miliband, because at that time, Ed Miliband seemed to be more sensible than his brother, David, who was more continuity Blair. I remember following the election at the time and egging on Ed Miliband because the stuff he was talking was about kind of transformative politics and doing things differently, whereas his brother was more continuity Blair and Brown.
So bring us up to date, Mish. Let's talk about your bid to become a parliamentary candidate. We've talked in previous podcasts about the shameless stitch-ups that have happened around the country. We spoke at length in one of the podcasts with Hilary Shan about what happened in Worthing. And that's led to quite a mediocre makeup of the current parliamentary Labour Party, let's say. Let's talk us through the anatomy of what happened in Wolverhampton West. What did they do in your selection process?
I was approached by comrades in Wolverhampton West if I would run for the parliamentary seat there. There were two other candidates that they invited as well, left wing, and there was a informal left wing hustings where me and reportedly two other people. Now I never met the two people; they were all on different days, and they invited us to a hustings, and I was chosen by them to be their left wing candidate to run in that for that seat in Wolverhampton West. Now we knew that it was going to be a challenge. We knew that the Labour Party right wing and the Starma people wouldn't want me to be chosen as the candidate. So we expected shenanigans, we expected to be blocked, we expected all sorts. So when they ended up and did block me, it was not a shock. It was not any different to what we expected. The reason why they blocked me, the official reason given, was because I voted on the NEC against the EHRC action plan. So if you remember, the Labour Party was
EHRC, for those that might not know the abbreviation.
The Equality and Human Rights Commission. If you remember, the Labour Party was investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission.
I remember.
But they came and provided, and they asked the Labour Party to sort itself out following the anti-Semitism crisis. The Labour Party was then came back and was asked to set up an action plan as to what it would do to fix the faults and fix the anti-Semitism crisis that had engulfed the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn and after that. So that EHRC action plan had, if I remember, 32 certain points of actions that they were going to come through on. There's two things that I voted against. One of the action plan recommendations was that there will be independent panel, which is good. Obviously, I would prefer an independent panel on a disciplinary panel, but the independent panel, which would be of solicitors and professionals, would be chosen by the General Secretary. Now, if anybody's read the EHRC report, that in itself, the EHRC report said that the General Secretary, who at the time was Jenny Thornberry, the HRC report said that the General Secretary was not an independent person. They were a political appointee, hence political. So our argument was that if the General Secretary of this organisation is a political appointee, then they can't be independent. So I voted against that recommendation for the General Secretary to pick an independent panel. Because I voted against that recommendation, which was quite important in my opinion, I voted against the HRC action plan because the votes were taken separately. One for what you voted against and one for the plan. And because I voted against the HRC action plan, the Labour Party thought that I would not be a high quality candidate. And that was the reason that was given for my blocking.
Just to put that in context, Mish in this period was getting elected every year by the national executive by the party members, and the range of nominations that Mish got in the selection process included the Trade and Drivers Union, ASLEF, the Postal Workers, the CWU, the Firefighters, the FBU, the Transport Salaried and Staffs Association, the Socialist Education Association, the Socialist Health Association, Unite, the second biggest union in Britain. So how on earth could a panel decide that Mish was an unsuitable candidate when all those Labour movement bodies and the membership of the Labour Party kept continually nominating you and electing?
I mean, at the time I was blocked, I was a two-term elected member of the NEC, and I'd also chaired panels for long listing other parliamentary selections. So I was fit enough, high quality enough to chair parliamentary selections where other candidates were getting selected and shortlisting other people, but I wasn't fit enough to be long listed myself. And I'm not bitter about that. Absolutely not, because even if I was selected as a candidate, and I have no doubt that I would have as well. The main reason why they blocked me is because we'd been running a campaign for what, 18 months prior to them blocking me, because the campaign opened and then shut down. They shut down for about 6 months and then it reopened again. But we'd been running a campaign for 12 to 18 months. And we had, in a constituency of about 600 people, we already had 200 promises. As in 200, we had knocked off about 300 people. And of that, we had about 200 promises that we'd get. And that was almost a guaranteed selection if that selection would have happened. So before I stood, I sent Kier Starma a WhatsApp message to say that if I'm going to go for this seat, and if you want me to stand aside, or if there's a problem with me going for the seat, I'd rather you tell me before than after it happens. I never got a reply to that WhatsApp, but he knows that I went for it. And the day after I got blocked, it was the National Policy Forum. So I did bump into Starmer, and Morgan McSweeney was there as well. As soon as I approached Starmer, Morgan McSweeney quickly dispersed. And I said to Starmer, look, I sent you a message before I stood. If there was going to be a reason to block me, you could have said it, and I probably wouldn't have stood, or I would have understood what the situation is. But instead, you chose for me to go through that process and to humiliate me, and that's just not on. His response was, I get your points. I get your point. Morgan McSweeney had done a runner. He wasn't brave enough to face me at the time. But Starmer said, I get your point. I get your point. And that was it. But it's understandable. And I said this publicly at the time when they ditched Faiza Shaheen. It was intentionally to humiliate these people, that socialists, that left-wing activists, people that support Palestine, people that speak up for social justice are just not welcome. Managerial suits are the type of people that they wanted as high quality candidates. And we ran a good campaign in terms of we knew we would have won, and a lot of good people in Wolverhampton West. And I just continue my solid. I am still in touch with most of the people that were active and supportive of me. And yeah, I just want to thank them again for running that campaign.
From Wolverhampton to Worthing, it is absolutely nothing to do with high quality candidates, the way the selection processes were run prior to the general election. It was factional stitch-ups. Did some of those NEC members that subsequently became parliamentary candidates, Mish, did they participate in stopping others getting on long lists?
Well, they must have, because although whoever was on my panel didn't end up becoming an MP, actually one of them did. One of the people that was on my due diligence appeal, she ended up becoming an MP. So yeah, many of them did, and then also other people like Garinda Josan. They must have been on panels. Luke Akers was on panels. Yeah, they were all on panels. So yeah, in the end, and just like before, and you had leadership programs such as the Bernie Grant leadership program, which I was part of under the Corbyn years, and not a single person from the Bernie Grant leadership program, which is for a program to develop Black and Asian and ethnic minority leaders into positions such as councils and parliamentary Labour Party. That's never happened. Nobody from the Bernie Grant leadership program has become a parliamentary candidate or an MP, as far as I know.
And what you say about the organisation set up to celebrate the legacy of Bernie Grant and bring forward Black candidates, not one of those people that have come through that exercise to support them becoming candidates getting elected is absolutely astounding. When you think of Bernie Grant, one of the first Black Labour MPs elected alongside Diane Abbott, one of the most outstanding politicians of my lifetime in Parliament and the Parliamentary Labour Party, for what he achieved. The idea that his legacy should be to set up an organisation to encourage black and brown candidates to come forward, and none of them get selected. That says so much about today's Labour Party, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, on the NEC, Mish, I just thought it'd be interesting to get your insights about when you go along to the National Executive Committee and represent as ordinary members, what's it like? And I asked that question in the light of Liz Davies, who's was a National Executive Committee member during the New Labour years. She was the dissenter, if you like, within New Labour. Her impression was that Labour's governing body didn't always feel like she was witnessing democracy in action. How was it for you?
So I watched your interview with Liz Davies, and not much has changed in those 20, 30 years between Liz getting onto the NEC and me being on the NEC for 20 years or so. Difference. In all honesty, right now, there isn't any democracy in action. Starmer's majority is so big, they can predetermine whatever they want to. And the NEC is just a rubber stamp. There's not even much room for raising objections, as in, even if you raise an objection to some sort, you're not going to win the vote because they have so strong a majority, and the meetings are really short now. I remember when I joined the NEC, when the majority wasn't quite as big, but they still had a majority. But there were kind of people that would swing depending on the issue. But back then there was some debates. I think many of the Labour rights believe that the shorter the NEC meetings, the more close to Labour are to power, and that's what they say as well. The shorter the NEC meetings, meaning that they can do what they want. They don't have to go through these robust debates. They don't like robust debates because robust debates they look silly and they lose these debates. But they have enough voting power to get blocked through and rubber stamp whatever they want to get done. So everything's predetermined.
Like me, you're a football fan, and I found Jeremy Gilbert's analogy about the Labour Party. His analogy is that the Labour Party is the pitch upon which Labour movement politics are fought out. I find that analogy, rather than thinking whether you support the Labour Party and its leadership, which we obviously don't, I don't find that particularly useful. I think of it more as the pitch which we fight out the struggle for Labour movement politics. So if we're not going to take Jeremy Gilbert's analogy, going to storm off the pitch in disgust, how do we get the Labour left back in a winning position?
For the Labour left to get back into a winning position, that is not necessarily just down to people in the Labour Party as well. The Labour left does not include people just within the Labour Party. The Labour left includes a lot of people part of the trade union movement who might not right now be Labour members. Don't forget, over the last few years, during my time on the NEC, I've seen membership go down significantly, almost half. I think we're near 300,000 now, then more. I mean, with 300,000 members compared to what, almost 600,000, which we had at the height under Jeremy Corbyn. So a lot of these people would still regard them as part of the left, the British left, the trade union left, the Labour movement left, but not particularly the Labour Party. So I think the political situations are volatile. 5 years ago, Boris Johnson wouldn't have thought that he'd lose an 80-seat majority and so quickly. And right now we see Kier Starma with such a big majority and his popularity going through the floor. We don't know what politics quickly changes and situations may change, but it's also important to remember that the Labour left to get back in a winning position, whether that's inside the Labour Party or whether the outside the Labour Party. The fight is still in our workplaces. The fight is still in our communities. The fight is still on our streets. The fight is still against government, the types of government that could put kids out of poverty, especially kids whose parents are on benefits, a two-child benefit cap. That's not something you would expect a Labour Party to keep. You would have voted the Tories out so you could repeal those kind of laws. You don't have a Labour Party which freezes pensioners. that fight is still for us to fight. The Labour Party was not elected to keep the pensioners' fuel cut active, and now we're going after the students in trying to. We're hearing that they're trying to raise tuition fees, so that fight needs to happen. And then there's a fight about benefit fraud and things like this. Whereas a simple wealth tax could have solved half of these problems and fill these imaginary black holes that they have. So the fight still remains on the streets. The fight remains in our communities. Fight remains in the workplaces, and the British left, trade union movement, the Labour movement still needs to organise in those spaces, because the Labour Party or any party in government uh, does not seem to be representative of us. The other fear that we have is this rise of far right populism, the rise of fascism, which these neoliberal capitalist policies, which aren't solving anybody's problems, are actually causing the rise of these far right populists such as Farage, because you have people like Nigel Farage criticising Kier Starma and the Labour Party and the current government. To the left of them, Nigel Farage is against the two-child benefit cap. He's against the winter fuel payments cut. So stuff like this, the Labour Party and the Tories, which whoever comes into government, is actually providing the fuel to that fire and making the populists more popular than ever. So it's important that we fight on that front as well.
So I suppose our role is to be the voice of those struggles outside the Labour Party, within the Labour Party. We're to amplify those struggles and take them into the heart of the party.
Those that are still in the Labour Party, like me and you, will have to fight that battle in the party to make those arguments against the leadership. Those that are outside the Labour Party also need to make those arguments through their trade unions, in their workplaces, and in the ballot box, and on movements that are forcing these pressures. Because every time there's change, this change happens outside Westminster. Change doesn't happen in Westminster. Westminster votes it through, but the change comes from the people. It comes from the grassroots. It comes from political activism down below. So it's important for that change to continue to be pushed.
Thanks for watching the first half of the Labour Left podcast. In a moment, the second half starts, and Mish and I turn to the issue of racism. We talk about Mish's involvement in Give Racism the Red Card, Gaza, the Labour Muslim Network, and Mish names the absolute cracking nomination that he's got for Class Hero of the Month. Finally, please help us promote the podcast. What you can do that really helps us get our show before listeners and watchers is you've got to share, follow, like and rate and comment upon the show wherever you see it. If you do that, it gets that algorithm going and more people get to see the show. Here's the second half. Your anti-racist campaigning has extended to Show Racism the Red Card, Mish. Can you tell us, the watchers and listeners, about that campaign and your role as a trustee within Show Racism the Red Card?
Show Racism the Red Card is Britain's leading anti-racist education charity. They do a lot of stuff in terms of educating children about racism in schools, junior schools, secondary schools, and also adults, and using footballers and cricketers and rugby players and sports people as role models. When we visit schools with our educators, we bring along these role models. We involve local football clubs, which are at the heart of our communities. Most people and most communities are organised around a football club. So we have Premier League and Championship and English Football League clubs, which provide us spaces, so they get involved as well, and their players turn up as well. So when children go and get this anti-racism education, they also meet their football heroes as well.
It's obvious that you're a very respected anti-racist activist, but let's bring it back because of your work within Show Racism the Red Card. But let's bring it back to the Labour Party, and I want to talk about the Ford report. Can you explain to the viewers and listeners why the Ford report was so important and what you've done to fight to get the NEC, the National Executive Committee, to implement it.
So, as you all know, the Ford report was following a leaked report that showed shocking levels of racism and sexism from within the Labour Party. WhatsApps and stuff was leaked. And Kier Starma, one of his first actions after becoming Labour leader, was to appoint and commission a report by Martin Ford, a respected lawyer who himself is a black man. And he took, well, it took, if I remember, and it's all seems history now, but I remember it took a very long time for him to actually publish his report. I think it took about 2 years from the point of commission to the report actually being published. And Martin Ford actually, after the report was out, did a decent job of the report. He highlighted those shocking levels of racism and sexism and a lot of the issues that were in the Labour Party. But one of the major findings was this hierarchy of racism, which we all knew existed, but it was good for that to be recognised, that somebody independent looking into the Labour Party recognised that there was a hierarchy of racism in the Labour Party, meaning that some forms of racism were not taken as seriously as other forms of racism, exposing a double standard and a hypocrisy, which is not consistent with a party that claims it's an anti-racist party. I mean, look, if you look at a lot of the stuff that Diane Abbott faced personally, and even despite the Ford report being implemented now, many of its stuff being implemented, there's been no accountability or even apology to people like Diane Abbott for what she endured from the Labour Party. I mean, we've heard some shocking excuses from the Labour leadership when asked that, oh, all this was under Jeremy Corbyn. But the people that were involved were very much people on the right of the party who had done and said the horrible things that was exposed in the leak report. It was a challenge for us to get Martin Ford, any responses from Martin Ford or from the General Secretary about updates from Martin Ford during the point from public between commission and publication. And then obviously since now we've heard from various news articles and stuff that Martin Ford was kind of being gagged as well by the leadership, or attempted to be gagged from speaking out. Martin Ford's gone public about stuff like this. Actually, just show that a lot of the factionalism that Martin Ford also exposed still exists, and the people that were, I mean, the media haven't really taken much interest into the Ford report. If you ask people in the media what the Ford report is, many of them wouldn't even tell you, and the ones that would tell you would say that a lot of this stuff happened under Corbyn, and right now the Labour Party itself is hunky-dory and none of this discrimination exists, which is obviously untrue if we talk about the Islamophobia and stuff that many people do say that exists right now. So yeah, a lot of the stuff from the Ford report has been implemented. But again, it goes down to show when incidents happen and how the Labour Party deals with it. But in all honesty, the Labour Party's disciplinary process now is much better than maybe it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, from when it wasn't. But that's all part of the process, that things get better as well through organisations when they come to a structure. So say if there was now a complaint, we'd expect that complaint to be dealt with thoroughly. There is an independent panel as well, which ratifies the decisions made. So there's no, so hopefully there's those decisions stand. But that independent panel is more like a VAR in football, just to see if the decision that's made is right or wrong. Sometimes the severity of that punishment might not change. It's just to make sure that the right decision has been made, whether the person that should have been punished has punished. The severity of the punishment isn't the independent panel. Rarely have I heard that the independent panels intervened and said, no, this person should be punished more or less. But hopefully the implementations have resulted in a disciplinary process. I mean, I've made complaints about racism against me and others, and they have been dealt with, which I can say since the Ford report's come out.
Generations to come will not judge the Labour Party's response favourably with regard to Israel's actions in Gaza and now beyond in Iran, the Lebanon and Yemen. So let's have a look at the notorious interview by Kier Starma, which he gave on LBC, and the response that you gave on that station shortly afterwards.
Started off by asking Sir Kier what a proportionate response to the attacks would be.
I think the first thing I have to say is responsibility lies with Hamas. This is cold-blooded murder of men, women, even children. It is terrorism, and Israel has the right to defend herself. And there are ongoing situations with hostages, and Israel has the right to do everything that it can to get those hostages back safe and sound. And therefore, I'm very clear, Israel must have that, does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sir Kier?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist
The values are to oppose racism, to oppose fascism, to oppose tyranny, to oppose injustice. Instead, what we've had, and on your show, this is what kicked off everything, not your show specifically, but on LBC, when Kier Starma came on and made a complete mess of what he was saying and clearly supported a siege.
What should he have said? Well, he says not, but what should he have said?
We heard what he said. He said that when Nick Ferrari asked him whether a siege is justified, he goes, he believes this is Israel's right.
And he subsequently said that he was answering the previous question.
Yeah, but he might have subsequently said that. But then the very next...
I know, and I'm just reflecting that.
That very day, Emily Formby went on Newsnight and repeated pretty much the same. David Lammy the next day went on another show and repeated
that, Mish. First of all, I'd like to thank you for what you do on the media and how you give a voice to the thousands of Labour members who are shamed by the stance taken on the siege of Gaza by Kier Starma, David Lammy and Emily Formby. The video clip I'm showing at the moment is the sea of Palestinian flags held by ordinary party members at our Labour Party conference on the 25th of September 2018. The Labour Party officials have sought to silence those members again and again to prevent us from debating policy and to make us fearful to speak up for the Palestinian people. We must never let that happen. And I just want to say, before we go into the discussion on Palestine and Gaza, Mish, that when you go on the media and you speak for thousands of Labour Party members. And I think we all need to be very grateful for that you give us voice. We all know the history which led up to the events of the last 12 months and that they started with the dispossession of the Palestinian people during the Nakba, known as the catastrophe back in 1948. But we've got to talk about the last 12 months. And in that context, to start us off, Mish, what should the left say today about the Hamas massacre on the 7th of October 2023?
Hamas massacre was unacceptable and nothing justifies that. But also, subsequently, nothing justifies the response that Israel has provided since that 1,200 people, innocent people, were reportedly killed by Hamas on October the 7th. But since then, we've had 40 times the death toll of that date. And many of them are children. We see on our TV screens limbs and dead men, women, children. Many of the pictures we see are that of children. It's just, everybody finds it appalling. But what I find most appalling is not just those pictures. What I find most appalling is Western governments, Western leaders, and their ilk who provide cover to Israel in the name of self-defense, while we know and we witness this massacre happening on our TV screens, on Twitter, on TikTok. It's called the TikTok massacre. TikTok genocide, that's what it's called. many people refer to it as. Never have we seen this kind of massacre happening on our live, on our phones, on our screens as we have before. And it's by a racist far-right Israeli government who are our allies, and that's why we stand up for Palestine. Because if we can't control our so-called allies, Israel, who we support through weapons, through trade, through business, through relations, we send our MPs and Labour Party friends of Israel, send Labour Party members to Israel. And if we can't control and influence our allies and friends, and what good are they to stop them from killing innocent people? If we can't stop them from not just killing innocent people, from starving innocent people. Even today, as we speak, as time of recording, I think this is the 17th day in a row when enough food hasn't gone through to Gaza because of the blockages by the Israeli government and its army of not letting enough food and medicine through into Gaza.
So when you go to the National Executive Committee, you presumably try to raise these points. What does Starma say? How can he even begin to pretend, as you said, you said in the film clip, how can he even begin to attempt to justify what he's doing? How can he explain that he's following Labour values in what he's saying and doing and giving cover for the Israeli government?
First of all, we can't raise these issues on the NEC. The NEC is not the forum, according to the Labour Party leadership, or the place where to raise this. This is a policy issue. There's other places. This is an international issue. The NEC is for business and governance relating to the Labour Party, so we're not allowed to raise it there. Although
where
we've
is
tried.
the place? Because in my constituency, when we try to raise a motion, we're not allowed to put it. You're not allowed to raise it on the National Executive Committee. Where is the place?
One of my NEC colleagues, Laura Pidcock, asked that very question about motions. Say, look, can you tell me the journey of a motion? Where does a motion go from a constituency? People spend a lot of time writing motions, lobbying people to support the motion. We send that motion through to the NEC. Where do these motions go? And the real fact of the matter is those motions go into a document which comes to the NEC, and the NEC doesn't even look at them in the meeting. They may as well go in the bin, because that's where they go. And when Laura Pidcock asked that question, that's when Margaret Beckett called her a silly cow. And it was and the hot mic was on where she forgot to switch her mic off, and she said silly cow. And then there was a furore over that, if you remember, when Margaret Beckett called Laura Pidcock that. But that's what happens. The Labour Party, those motions that people spend a lot of time on, unless it's at conference, and even if you get a motion through conference, the very next day, some cabinet minister or government minister will say that's not Labour Party policy just because it's gone through conference. Many of these motions, and many examples of this you'll find where motions have gone through conference, which is sovereign, and then the party ends up and saying just because it's gone through conference doesn't mean it matters. So we can't raise this kind of stuff in NEC meetings. If you remember, back a month or so after the NEC, after the October the 7th attacks, and then the subsequent reaction from Israel, and then when the killing started from their side, obviously myself and a few others, we started an organisation called Labour for a Ceasefire. And that was with an intention of bringing enough support so we can raise a motion at the NEC. By the time those signatures and that motion was around, Joe Biden decided it was time for a call for a ceasefire. Hence, Kier Starma, within hours, decided it's time to call for a ceasefire. So, I mean, the ceasefire itself, or the calling for a ceasefire, had already happened. But we're not allowed to discuss this on the NEC, as in it's not on the agenda. And if anything's not on the agenda, you can't discuss it.
So the situation within the Labour Party today, it seems to me that Starmer's stance has been moving, albeit at the speed of a tectonic plate. But what progress do you think we're making as a Palestine solidarity movement to push Labour, now it's in government, to actually shift its positions? Do you think they're feeling under some pressure? Do you think we're making some progress? Do you think that, I know they don't like what we're saying, but are they being forced to listen to an extent?
Every time you speak out against injustice, you make progress because you encourage somebody else to speak out against injustice. You challenge the powers to be to either condemn that injustice or say something about the injustice. So every time we go out on the streets and we protest, we are making a difference and we are putting pressure on the powers to be to make things better. Right now, you will struggle to find anybody on TV unless there's some warped psychopath to go out and defend the actions of the Israelis. You will see when you go on TV and you see these reports of people being killed by Israel, very, very few commentators come out to defend them other than, the Israeli government, the IDF spokespeople or whatever. Yeah. So the condemnation is actually quite universal. You're seeing governments such as Spain, Ireland, calling out Israel, recognizing the Palestinian state. The bottom line to your question is that the moral superiority that Starmer, Biden, and anybody in the West has or believes they have it really lies in tatters. And that is down to us being able to speak out, protest, and expose their hypocrisy, calling out their double standards and their genuine disregard for international law by Israel. So that's where the shift is. That's where it is. Statements are becoming more and more concerning from Starmer in terms of towards Israel. And they have to be because there will be justice. This is not like the Iraq War where Tony Blair just got away with it. This genocide is being archived. There's going to be ample evidence, and those on the wrong side of history have nowhere to hide.
We've recently seen over 100 councillors, Muslim councillor network in the Labour Party, come together to write to Kier Starma calling for an end to the arms sale to Israel. What's your understanding of where we're at with that, Mish? What was the letter about and what's the response been?
I've seen the letter. It's a letter, and I've seen. I think it's almost near 200 councillors now.
Oh, is it? That's brilliant.
Yeah, but I don't expect Starmer to respond to them. Starmer won't respond to them. Starmer didn't respond last time. Starmer didn't respond to any of the emails or the letters that the Labour Muslim Network put out last time. Starmer has the Labour Muslim Network has tried to be an affiliate to the Labour Party while I was on the NEC. I think it must have been about 2 years ago. They're not an affiliate yet. I don't think Starmer wants them to affiliate. I think, in fact, Starmer's probably thinking of setting up his own Muslim network of people that are not going to challenge him or just happy with him and the way it's going. I think that's what Starmer's facing towards now. The Muslim Council of Britain. Now, obviously, the Muslim community aren't a monolith as well. Yeah, we don't have a group of people. As a Muslim, so we don't have a group of people representing us on the national scale as such. But the Muslim Council of Britain is kind of an umbrella organisation, yeah, which is quite representative, not fully, but quite representative of the Muslim community. I was on a panel with Zara Mohammed, who's the General Secretary of that organisation, and she said that the Labour Party hasn't yet engaged with the Muslim Council of Britain. The last to a Tory government declined to engage with the Muslim Council of Britain. Kier Starma has yet to engage with the Muslim Council of Britain. And there's rumours that he's trying to set up his own version of the Muslim Council of Britain of people who are sycophants of his or more closer to his way of thinking in terms of just not rocking the boat. I mean, that's how Kier Starma feels towards Muslims and ethnic minorities who disagree with him. Can you imagine Kier Starma ignoring any other community like that? Can you imagine Kier Starmer ignoring, say, the Jewish community like that? If 200 Jewish councillors wrote a letter, I don't think he would. But Muslims are okay for him to ignore. But I think Labour Muslims should have an affiliate, just like Christians on the left have one, and there's a Jewish Labour movement, and every other anybody else who wants to do. But and especially as we know, the situation in the UK where Muslims face the most hate crimes. We've had far-right riots where people have literally tried to burn down mosques and people in mosques. It sounds like perfectly reasonable when you have hundreds of Muslim councillors in your party, and of them, a few hundred or a couple of hundred or just over 100 have written to you, the leader, calling for an end to the arms sales. What's your response? You're not going to give one. You didn't give one last time. I don't expect you to give one this time either.
So, Labour Party members, what would you like to say to them, Mish? As a socialist within the Labour Party, what do you think Labour Party members should be doing to show their solidarity with the Palestinian people?
Keep calling out the leadership, the Prime Minister, your MP to sign these parliamentary motions or take part in the debates. Put pressure on the Israeli government. If Labour Party right now in government can't put pressure on the Israeli government, then who can? UK and America are two of the closest allies to Israel. We have a seat at the United Nations where we end up either supporting Israel or abstaining on votes. So Starma can't get away with saying we have no influence when obviously we do. So keep up the pressure, keep the protests, keep putting pressure on your elected leaders, because we need to continue the call for a ceasefire. We need the ending of all arms to Israel. We need our government to go beyond these fake statements of concern and actually put pressure on Israel to stop these attacks on innocent civilians and stop this forcible expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. That's got to be the aim. And until that happens, we keep going to go shout about it. Doesn't matter how much they're annoyed about it or how much they get pissed off about it. We'll keep on shouting about it until that's solved.
Yeah, we must never be silenced on this issue. But finally, Mish, your experience as a Labour Party member, we've talked about the Ford report, we talked about your experience as a parliamentary candidate, we've talked about Labour's stance on having a Muslim affiliate, we've talked about Palestine. Has the Labour Party got an Islamophobia problem? How would you describe what is happening in the Labour Party?
I've said this, I've wrote about it. I genuinely think the Labour Party is institutionally Islamophobic. I've just told you how the Labour Party doesn't engage with Muslims. It's not willing to affiliate Labour Muslim Network. Instead, there's rumours that it's trying to set up its own version of the Labour Muslim Network. It's not engaging with the Muslim Council of Britain. Instead, there's a Guardian article where Labour, I think it's a Guardian article, where Labour are looking to set up their own version of the Muslim Council of Britain, their own version of people who are going to be sycophantic and supportive of whatever Starmer puts on. And it's quite consistent with Labour's attitude towards Muslims for many, many years, because for far too long, many Muslim members and voters have felt like they're treated as voting fodder. Tony Blair's illegal war against Iraq, where the vast majority of people that died were Muslims. The vast majority of people that are dying in Palestine are also Muslims. This is the genuine threat one. This is a genuine thing where people are genuinely concerned that Starmer does not treat, and the Labour Party does not treat Muslim lives as valuably as other lives. At the time, we just spoke about the Muslim councillors. Over 250 Muslim councillors wrote to Starmer calling for an immediate ceasefire back in October or November. And they demanded a meeting with Starmer and his deputy, Angela Rayner, and nothing happened. Like I said, I believe the Labour Party is institutionally Islamophobic. It sees Muslims as voting fodder, and people like me or other people, other Muslims who they disagree with, they ignore, look down upon. I'm telling you, my views are more representative of the Muslim community than some of the sycophants that they want to replace people like me and the views that we hold, which are representative of our community, compared to the ones that they want to replace us with.
So, Mish, finally, before we end the podcast, it's time to name your class hero of the month. Who was the inspiration that led to Mish Rahman becoming such a determined socialist? Mish, who is your class hero and what have they done to be added to our Hall of Fame?
So my class hero is Fred Hampton. Now, the reason why Fred Hampton is my class hero is because, I mean, I think in line with the current times where we are facing a far-right threat, a racist threat, now more than ever, I believe, just like Fred Hampton tried to do when his battle for civil rights, tried to build a rainbow coalition of anti-racists from all backgrounds and people that are fighting with the class struggle as well, because obviously racism and the class struggle is entrenched with one another. And he gave fiery speeches as well, which rocked the establishment. This was a young man of barely 21 years of age who did so much in terms of being able to inspire people. He was a Marxist and he was a class fighter as well. He gave fiery speeches. If you remember his famous speech about I am a revolutionary and how he's going to fight racism with socialism, racism with and it's not going to fight fire with fire, but fire with water. And also about his speech about how it's a class struggle, God damn it. I think Fred Hampton, especially as it's Black History Month as well, especially as it was such a young, renowned, radical activist who should be remembered. And I think is an example to us all of how to fight the class struggle, how to fight racism as well.
A member of the Black Panther movement joins our Hall of Fame, and an inspiration to all the listeners and watchers. Is there any books or films that you could guide people to find more out about him?
There's also a great film called Judas and the Black Messiah. Great film, covers a lot of what Fred Hampton did. And you've got to remember, you watch the film and you read the stuff he wrote, and you read the stuff he said, and you see his speeches on YouTube as well. This man was only 21 years old when he died. Just 21. He had so much talent. 21, just imagine, I mean, I've got a 19-year-old boy, and I mean, Fred Hampton by the age of 19 was so active, and by the age of 21 his life had ended. So watch the film Judas and the Black Messiah.
Thanks for that, Mish, and thanks ever so much for coming on the Labour Left podcast and giving us an insight about what it was like to be on Labour's National Executive Committee. Thanks, Mish.
Thank you so much, Bryn. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to all your other interviews and the wonderful guests that you invite as well.